Thanks for having us.
Of course, thanks for coming. We always start off these with the same question, which I'm confused on how we're going to do it with two people now, but I'm going with it anyway. So what were your lives like growing up, and what were you like growing up? Blake, you want to lead us off?
Sure, I'll start. So I had probably kind of a weird kid growing up. Was the second of 5 kids, big family. My dad was always an entrepreneur, doing different crazy things. One thing in particular, he started a coffee soda company. Didn't work at all, but like big portion of my childhood was like the bottles of coffee soda like in the garage. And I think that a lot of stuff that he worked on with me kind of turned into Inbox Health eventually. And even going back further generations, there was always entrepreneurship in my family. My grandfather, my grandmother in New Haven. And New Haven was always like where I was and where I was spending my time. And the other thing that's kind of weird is that my parents really like taking all the kids to Disney World, like all the time. And that I really latched on to the experience of like what they built and what they designed. To the point where I became obsessed with it. My older brother and I started building our own Disney World rides in our basements and our backyards, and would bring the neighborhood children on these ridiculous concoctions that we had created. And I think that was kind of what drove my obsession with product and experience, and I think what ultimately helped push me towards being an entrepreneur.
How was your insurance?
It was very bad.
Charlie, how about you?
Yeah, so thanks for having us here. I was third of 6 kids growing up in Minnesota. My father was a doctor, and he basically taught us, or his view of college was that it was not a vocational school. You should just go learn how to read, write, and think. So kind of a basic liberal arts type of degree. So I went and I got a theology degree from Georgetown, not ever thinking I would be a priest, but just I enjoyed the Jesuits and got a good education there. But when I graduated, I had no sort of career aspirations or thoughts, and just sort of found myself, my parents said, okay, well, the buck stops, now you got to fend for yourself. So I sort of fell into entrepreneurship, started my own business right out of college, grew that, liked doing that, ended up selling that and deciding I needed a more formal business education, so I went off and got my MBA. And then after that, did some more entrepreneurial stuff until coming up here in Connecticut in 2000 when we started Tangoe.
What was your first business?
It was selling telecommunications equipment in Washington, D.C., primarily to, it was right during the AT&T divestiture, and so there was a really neat opportunity at the time, a bit of a niche, but it was to replace those old ticker tape telex machines that you see in some of the old movies with newer digital communications. So we just sort of went around and replaced those, and at that point, facsimiles started coming on in big time. You probably don't know what these things are, but so that was kind of, it was selling services and equipment to businesses.
So Blake, you also, I believe, had a somewhat untraditional major, or at least part of your major.
Oh, I would say so, yeah. My major was musicology, which is like music theory and history. Which is not probably a great major, or it is a great major maybe similarly, I don't think you learn how to think and research and write and not, how do you teach someone how to run a business? I took a lot of business classes, to be fair, so, but I think more instrumental to sort of who I am was my weird obsession with experience from trying to create theme parks in my basement. So, weirdly enough, that meant a lot more than.
Do you feel like you're getting anything out of the musicology experience, or it was just fun while you were there?
No, just the research side and writing. There's this sort of ultimately it was a liberal arts school, Providence College. It was a very strong liberal arts background. I had a lot of business classes, but the musicology side was by and large research and writing, which I think is applicable to just about anything. So, yeah, I think it's applicable. And then there's the other side, being in a band and like running a band and like managing that. There's aspects of that are applicable to everything, and I think
You're not the first person on not this technical stage who said exactly that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap between music and entrepreneurship, and I think also to computer science. The number of CS people who come in through our doors who are also music people, including Simon, my co-founder, who we met through high school musicals mostly, like in the high school theater. We're kind of the coolest kids in the school, you might say. But yeah, we knew each other going back further than that, but that was the biggest reason that we spent a lot of time together in high school.
So, Charlie, you went back and had some corporate experience. What did you take away and what did you learn from that time?
I'm sorry, when I went...
After your first business, you went and got into the corporate world?
I went and got an MBA.
Okay.
And so for 2 years, and then I went right back into entrepreneurship. I went and got involved in an alternative fuels company in West Virginia. They hired basically a large angel investor had bought this company, and it was a bit troubled, so I came in as CEO, and we ended up selling it to Boone Pickens, who was big in natural gas vehicles at the time and still is. But so they acquired us and moved us down to Texas.
Did you continue to work there after it was acquired?
Yeah, I continued to work there for a few years and then went off and did more. I did another tech startup. This was sort of the early internet days, so I got involved in a digital consumer-based company that didn't go that well. So I was there for about a year, and then that's when I connected to some people I knew up here, and we decided to start what became Tangoe.
Blake, what was your first job out of school?
During college and just after, I was the logistics manager for a large catering company, the owner of which fled to France and didn't pay our last paychecks. And then basically after that, I immediately started like getting involved in some of my dad's interesting healthcare ventures that were more on the finance side, but ultimately led me towards what became Inbox Health. So I was working on financing for medical practices, so like providing loans to doctors' offices, and then that eventually spun into financing for patients for elective procedures. And that's sort of like where I saw crossover between patients who were looking for loans for an elective procedure and patients who were looking for loans for non-elective procedures, and starting to look more at sort of why that was happening, what the trends were behind that. Working with Scott, who's an MD who actually works with us now, and talking with him about his experience in private practice and sort of the challenges that he was seeing, and then ultimately working with Simon, who was working at 3M's healthcare group at the time, on sort of like what we can do to sort of address this sort of growing issue. So it kind of slowly trended. I basically never had a real job, so that's the answer.
Was healthcare by design in any way, or that was just where the opportunity was and you took it?
I mean, I certainly didn't set out with that intention from the get-go. I think what's kind of interesting is that when I graduated school, it was like the midst of the market crash. And so my father, who for the 10 years prior had owned a mortgage company, doing primary residential lending for people buying houses, but also then sort of transitioned to the commercial market for commercial financing. In the midst of the crash, I mean, there was no lending to be done for the vast majority of the market. So he saw an opportunity to specialize in healthcare, which is where there was still lending, particularly the Small Business Administration. The SBA loans were very focused on the healthcare market because it was a strong market, solid growth, very predictable, low risk. So in 2008, 2009, that was like a big focus for the financing market, and where he decided to drive his business. And that's what sort of set me on that path towards the healthcare space.
So Charlie, how'd you end up moving up to Connecticut and kind of getting involved with Tangoe?
Yeah, so I actually, one of my college friends, he was a year ahead of me, I had stayed in touch with, was from Connecticut, and he was a successful entrepreneur up here, and a guy named Gary Martino, who also knew a guy named Al Sabloy, and they had a company up here called IMA, based in Shelton. So anyway, I'd stayed in touch with Gary, and I was looking for something, and this was, again, 1999, so internet was really starting to get big, and I came up with the idea of a telecom expense management business that they got behind. So they and some others funded it and decided to start it up here because that's where they were, and convinced my wife it was a good idea. We had 2 young kids. So we moved up here, and then the market crashed. So, we couldn't, it was literally the dot-com crash. So we couldn't raise that second round of funding. So we had built up and got to about 15 people, and we had to start laying people off. And my wife is looking at me wondering what's going on, and then our house burns down, so we have to move out of the house. So it was a bit of a tough period, but we did a pivot. We started off as really a reverse auction where we were going to large enterprises and giving them a system to allow them to buy telecom services more cheaply. And in trying to get out to that market and really starting to engage with customers, we realized what a mess corporate telecom was. I mean, there was waste all over the place. So we built an application that essentially allowed large enterprises to better manage their inventory, their contracts, et cetera. And then we got some additional angel funding in late 2000, and really then, started to follow that sort of ideal startup trajectory of the hockey stick and just started building and building and building. But that was the move up here.
What did it take to convince you that you should pivot the business away from creating a market to expense management?
Yeah, it was really engaging with customers. I mean, what we did is we didn't have a product, but we had started to build the reverse auction, and to sell it, we started selling consulting engagements, which to me is a highly recommended way to start engaging with customers, getting professional service fees, and really sort of uncovering what the real pain points are. So we started selling these services, and in so doing, that's when we really uncovered all the different, I mean, literally I could tell stories about, large companies who had closed buildings 2 years ago and were still paying for telecom services. Because they just had no idea. They'd get these huge bills from AT&T or MCI or whomever, and they would just, no one was going to go through and audit them. So they would negotiate back then 7 cents a minute, or whatever it is, and they'd be billed 12 cents a minute, but no one could figure out the bills. So there was, all sorts of just waste, low-hanging fruit. So we could come in with consulting and save them literally millions of dollars. And in finding those problems, we basically developed the requirements for the software, and it became clear to us that the real opportunity was less a reverse auction and more of a system of control, almost an ERP system for telecom.
Okay. How'd you push through the crash? Were there points when you said, I don't think we can do this, I don't think we can make it work? How'd you kind of keep pushing through when I imagine a lot of companies fell by the wayside at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it was Blake actually sent out a blog this afternoon to me and to Simon about, that kind of touched on this, but the low points you feel as an entrepreneur. And I mean, literally, there was not much of a choice. I mean, I moved up here, had the house, and we were going to bust through it. And I think those first paid engagements, when we were dealing with telecom professionals who'd been in the business for 30, 40, 50 years, and we were all relatively new to telecom. We were more technology people. So we were a little bit nervous going into these rooms and doing consulting. But after 1 or 2 of these, and they're paying us $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, and we're realizing, geez, we're saving them millions of dollars, the confidence just started to build, the revenue started to build, and the goodwill that we generated from that. I mean, you go in and save an enterprise $3 or $4 or $5 million a year, they'll buy your software regardless of whether it works or not.
So turn over to Inbox Health. How did that come to be? What did the original genesis look like, and what did the team look like at that point?
So before Inbox Health existed, there was a product that we built, almost like an MVP actually built it with contractors, and it was really just me and some of the other business people were sort of involved at the time, but no one was really working on it full time except for me. And it was called IQ Copay. It was basically like a consumer bill management app that was flawed from the get-go in a way that we couldn't have understood until we saw it work, and that it was like a B2B2C situation, and there was no way to get doctors to push it to the consumers, and the consumers were ultimately the customer, and it just wasn't going to work. But it let us sort of see sort of what the challenges were going to be, and that's when I brought Simon on. So it was basically Simon came on as our CTO, and he and I started working on the product with a couple of the other early engineers. That was Inbox Health, and that's when we sort of transitioned it from a consumer product, or consumers managing their bills, to a provider product where providers use the software to better engage patients who had bills. But that turned out to be flawed in its own ways. The biggest one being that medical providers, when you sell directly to them, they don't have a lot of interest in patient billing. It's a big problem for them, and they recognize that, but they have a lot of other big problems, and they're really hard to sell to. It's really hard to scale it. And they all use a different software, and you sort of have to sell through their software vendor, and it's not a big enough sale to sort of do that scalably. So ultimately, that's what, we really struggled through our own, we essentially ran out of money. And basically just kept working through the problems with the product, trying to find a better fit for it. And then ultimately found that billing companies who worked with larger groups of small providers were a much better entry point to the market for us. They felt the need that we were solving a lot more dramatically, and it was just a stronger entry point. And that's sort of where we found ourselves. But essentially to get there, we went through a year and a half of, I think we all paid ourselves like $500 a month or something like that. And it was basically like a game to see if we could like last that long, which was pretty dicey, and just kind of lucky that we had the right group of people that could push through. And then eventually we just, we met with a big billing company and showed them our product, and they got really excited about it, and we started basically just rebuilding it for that customer type. And that's where it kind of took off from there at that point.
Do you think, looking back, there's anything you would have done differently, or the pain was just the only way to
I think,
find the
it'd
market?
be dishonest to say that you could have done it differently. I mean, I think, I think no one was sort of taking the angle that we're taking now at that time. And I think it would have been hard to see that this was the best possible path from the get-go. There's a lot we could have done faster. If we kind of had a better iterative process, and a team kind of better designed towards product iteration rather than constantly it's almost like you kind of deluded yourself into thinking you'd found product market fit, and wasting a lot of time and money proving yourself wrong. And you probably could have proven yourself wrong a lot faster than we did, and moved a lot faster to iterate. I think that's, with hindsight, like if I started a company again, which I'm sure I will, but that's what I would do differently, is just be better at rotating through iterations of the product a lot faster and wasting less money, and not investing as much in sales before you really know what you're putting fuel into.
Question for both of you, and you may have different opinions, and obviously it'll depend on the business, but what do you really want to have in kind of the initial founding team? Do you need to have a salesperson? Is that just the CEO has to be able to take on that role? Do you want to outsource technical, or do you want a CTO on board? What do you think that should look like?
Well, I think part of my issue is that I really didn't want to be a salesperson, and I had to be. And I think coming to terms with that took a long time, and I shouldn't have been trying to outsource sales from the beginning. Mm-hmm. But I think you need tech. I think you need tech in-house. I think trying to outsource that's a big mistake. You can't iterate with outsourced tech cheap enough and fast enough. It's just never going to work. And outsourced tech's never going to be dedicated enough to the problem. So I think you need a strong business operational kind of founder, and a strong tech founder, at least. And they have to sell the product themselves. Mm-hmm. And if they refuse to do that, like I did, stubbornly for too long, it's probably going to bite you in the ass.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely think you need a sales orientation early on, and I think for multiple reasons. One is it's a race to revenue, but two is it allows you to get engaged with the customers and figure out what's working and what's not. As Blake said, fail fast. So if you're out there engaging, et cetera. The problem is it's sometimes hard to keep good sales resources if you're failing a lot because they're in there for commissions. But I think you've got to get out there and engage. At Tangoe, we had a very sales-driven, sales-oriented CEO who, I credit a lot with the growth of the company. On the other hand, I think Blake, is very much of a product manager-oriented CEO. And, I think, in my view, that's equally important. I mean, I think the knowledge of both the space and the intricate detail as well as the technology and the interaction. I mean, his connection with Simon obviously goes way back, and the fact that he can talk in shorthand and really learn the market, know the market and interact that well, quickly, I think is equally important. So I think having both those angles where you're focused on the market, you're out trying to really drum up sales, but you also have a very tech-savvy, product management-oriented CEO, I think is very important as well.
So at what point did you decide, hey, this guy Charlie, he's going to be a great addition to the team. Let's go try to have him join.
He hasn't decided.
I think I've told you I was pretty suspicious of this idea. I thought for sure the investors had set this all up as a ruse to get me out. No, I think my suspicions are mostly like, why would you want to do it again? From the point that we were at when you joined, I think that I didn't think that you recognized how early it was, but I think you did. But I think just it took a long time of us chatting over lunches and in the office and kind of convincing myself that it was the right move. But I think, just time. I don't think there was any shortcut to it. But I don't know. I think anyone would have been a little bit like curious as to sort of what you were thinking. What's wrong with you? You know how bad it is. You know what could go wrong. So I don't know how you convinced yourself to do it.
Why'd you want to do it again?
I love this time frame. Even at Tangoe, the best times were this period when you're really, you have a product, you have a market, you're executing, you have success, the ramp is starting, and the next so all now it's a matter of execution, and you're sort of through I think that ordeal that Blake and Simon went through, and not that it's completely over. There's still risk, obviously, but it's now about building the business. And we're only 14 people, but each of us, when we come in the office every day, we know what we do makes a difference, right? And you can really impact the needle as one person, and that lasts only so long. When you get up to 2,500 people, which is what Tangoe ended up being. That's still a relatively small business in the scheme of things, but you're also somewhat of a cog in a wheel, and there's no one who's irreplaceable. So I think the ability to build and grow a business is very, very it's very rewarding, and to be part of a team, it's a tight-knit group, everyone's sort of pulling in the same direction. It's just fun. I really do enjoy it.
So obviously they had some product market fit at the point when you joined, but what made you say, hey, Inbox Health is the place I want to go rather than looking anywhere else?
Yeah, so I did look around quite a bit. I left Tangoe last September, and I was looking for exactly this dynamic where I could come in. I wasn't looking to be CEO, but I wanted to, have an impactful role in a startup company where I could both invest but also take an operational role. I didn't want to be a passive angel investor, and I think that. Inbox had a lot of things that checked the boxes. I think that the fact that they had a very big addressable market, they had a product that was working, they had a very good sort of technical approach to it with both Blake and Simon, that connection. So I think and the traction they were beginning to see. So I saw that there was a real opportunity to move the thing forward.
How do you guys split up the role of CEO and COO?
I don't know that our split is, I mean, it's not the first time, but it's a little atypical. I think you're primarily the leader on the ops sales side of the team, pretty wholly, and I'm pretty wholly the side of product, vision, investor relations is a bit split. I think that part's a little split. Finance is a little bit split, but that's definitely more you than me. But I think I'm a very product-focused CEO, and I very much spend the majority of my time thinking about that, although right now I don't have a lot of time to do anything but talk to VCs. But I think, that's, I don't know, I think probably a little unique. I think it probably just depends on the personalities and the skill sets, but I think that's sort of how, I think we both touch a little of everything, but I think that's generally how we do it.
I think we have a very collegial relationship where we neither of us make unilateral big decisions without talking to the other, and I think we respect each other's opinion, and we certainly don't always agree, but I think our skills and our experiences are very complementary. So I don't come in saying, "Oh, I've seen this all before and I know what to do," because Blake knows the space a lot better than I do. He's much more technical than I am, and he's got good judgment on a lot of different fronts. So I think we work well together, and I don't think, in operations, he knows a lot more about the nuts and bolts of operations. So the combination, I think, makes a good team.
That was probably one of the biggest risks bringing on. It's like we didn't really know how that dynamic was going to work until it started just falling into place.
Right.
And it just took a few months to figure out what it looked like, what it should look like.
How do you deal with it when you don't disagree, when you do disagree on something?
Blake gets 2 votes and I get 1 vote.
It hasn't been that bad yet. We'll see what happens. No, I think we're both pretty. There's no one here who's got that type of personality who has to be right. So I think one of us is going to be willing to back down in different circumstances.
I also think the results have been very encouraging for both of us, and our revenues have increased 3-fold since May. And we're getting great traction, and there's just a lot of positive momentum in the business. I think the trials will come when things aren't so rosy.
Yeah, things go bad, someone's going to have to get the blame.
So you've gone a bunch since May. What has driven that change? Do you think it's just market awareness? Are you scaling in sales? Is it a change in how you're marketing?
I think we found the dynamics that we needed going even back to March of last year, but I think then we had to shift the product to what it needed to be for the dynamics that we found. But the sales organization and the operations organization weren't where they needed to be to scale that. And I think that took quite a bit of time to get to, and I think that took until May to make that happen.
Looking at the business going forward, next 12 months, what are you most excited about?
I think bringing new people on and growing the company, and just seeing what how we can move things forward. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting 12 months. I mean, we're going to go from 13, 14 people to 25. There's going to be a lot of change, but I think more than any other time, I think we're going to be shaping sort of what the future of the company is in the next 12 months, like what the culture of it is, and I think that's where where I'll probably focus most of my attention, is sort of how we shape it in that way. I think it's just going to be a pretty interesting time. But yeah, I think it's going to be a really challenging time too. I think this is like where we really test how well we can scale it, and I think that's the most exciting and the most scary part of the next 12 months is figuring out how to go from 100 practices to 1,000, and how well we can do that. It's going to be really exciting.
Does that mean scaling across the organization, or are you focused on sales or a particular function?
I think it's across the organization, and I think one of the big challenges has been finding the talent and finding the people. New Haven's a really exciting place to be. I think it's a really strong place to be. But I think there are some challenges. One of them is finding talent, and I think that's something that we're struggling with a bit right now. But I think, it's kind of scaling across the company. I think sales is probably where we'll see less scaling, actually. It's more operational scaling, engineering scaling. But our sales organization, I think, is pretty well built to support the growth that we need to see.
Cool. So going back a little bit, at what point, both for Inbox Health, but also going back for looking at Tangoe and your previous ventures, did you start going out and looking for your initial round of investment, whether that's most likely angel investment? Where does the product look at that point? What do you have? What does your team look like?
I think right now it's probably has to be later. I think maybe I got a little lucky convincing angels pretty early, including our former CEO was our first angel. He really wanted to get involved. Kinetic Innovations was very instrumental in raising like the first small pool of capital. But I think raising the first real institutional capital, the bar is relatively high right now. For a seed round, I think there has to be a pretty solid product with pretty decent revenues, kind of getting up into the, maybe like 10,000 a month. I'd say at this point, and growing well. I think they want to see something that at least resembles product market fit, even if it's not really true product market fit. And I think it's just hard. It's hard right now to get over that first hump and to get to that point, unless you're fortunate enough to have like a situation where you can kind of just grind it out for a year or so, or you just get really lucky. But I think it's hard to like intentionally go about starting a business right now and raising capital, that first round of capital. I think a lot of things just have to fall into place the right way, or you have to kind of do it as a side project before you raise money. I just think the bar is a little bit higher than it has been in the past. But you've seen a lot more generations of this go down, so maybe.
Well, no, but I think it changes even like at Tangoe. That pre-crash, you could get funding if you had a pulse. Post-crash, you needed like 5 years of audited financials to get funding. So, and I think we're living right now, in some pretty uncertain financial times. A lot of people predicting recession, et cetera. So, if I was going to get funding, I'd probably try and get it quickly.
Is there an opportunity to sell the dream at this moment, or you think you've got to find a way to get to the first 10,000 MRR before you can really go have a conversation with anybody?
No, I think there's always a chance to sell the dream. But it's just
to angels, right?
Yeah,
you find somebody, a private investor who believes in you, who has a history with you. But it's obviously a lot easier with some revenue.
Yeah, what's your network like? Because finding networking to angels is not the simplest of tasks for your typical person.
When raising with an angel, when you've had success, is that typically asking a connection that you have a deep relationship with already? How much success do you have, say, going to an angel group of people you've never met before and pitching an idea?
The networking route is going to work a lot better. I think the group approach, I think they're very much following trends, following the leader. I think, if you have the right thing and decent traction, I think they're going to behave like a VC will in a group setting like that. I think especially if you're really early, I think selling the dream, I think you're far more likely to find someone who's passionate about what you're working on. And I think for us, it's, if we're talking to an angel, the angels who have personal experience and frustration with the problems that we're solving are the ones who are going to become passionate about the solutions that we're working on and sort of where it can go long term.
Going back a little bit, you mentioned you're looking at scaling the business. What sort of traits do you look for in employees, and is it the same across functions? Is there a sort of personality that you think works well at your company or works well at a startup?
Yeah, this it's been an ongoing conversation even this morning. I think for me, my preference is always to find really smart people who might not have much experience in doing whatever role you're looking for. But they're just really good at one thing, and they're just really bright and really passionate about the company and sort of what you're working on, and really want to get involved and dedicated. And I think that person can mold themselves to a bunch of different roles inside the company. At this stage, when we're like, this many people, like 14 people, the roles are probably going to change a bit. So I think the more malleable someone can be and the more flexible they can be and the better they're able to pivot to a new problem and sort of work with other departments and work with other team members to solve whatever's happening at the time, I think the better. And I think to me, it's just like a passion for a young company and to contributing to it. I think that's the biggest dividing factors. So some people just aren't built for that, and others are. And so I think that's what I look for. But there is some amount of internal debate, you might say, about what weight to give what factors, and some of it's just finding like who's walking through the door. I mean, ultimately, the best applicant might not meet the criteria that I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do agree. Intelligence is probably the primary thing you're looking for, especially at this stage, because there are different roles. You've got to pivot. You're looking for people to sort of create solutions. I think experience is helpful in doing, if you're looking for an operations person to run, a support desk, having some background on that is useful, or someone who's onboarded SaaS clients before is helpful, but not absolutely required as long as they're bright. I think two other dynamics, especially at this stage, are one is a culture fit, especially when you're in a small office. You need people who are going to fit in with the team, and not that everyone has to be clones, but you don't want a really disruptive personality in a small group like that. And then I think the third thing, which is really important, is someone who gets the entrepreneurial value proposition, who understands and has a passion for building something, who understands how equity works, what the play is, what the upside is, and wants to be on that boat, and who's not just looking for a job.
What's the hardest part about doing this in Connecticut, and what do you like most about doing it in Connecticut? And what do you think needs to happen for it to foster more entrepreneurship or more successful ventures in Connecticut?
Just in general, the ecosystem is for a startup is not yet where it needs to be. But there's not to undercut all the people that are working really hard, including yourself, to sort of make it better. But I think that's kind of like overarching the whole thing. Is like, is the capital there? But how does the capital that's not here kind of look at you? If we do a tour of Silicon Valley investors, do they kind of look at us like the yokels from Connecticut, or to quote one investor whose friend told him that New Haven was called gun waving New Haven. So you're kind of like dealing with some sort of prejudice against anyone who's not in New York, Cambridge, or San Francisco. I think the biggest real challenge is probably a shortage of talent looking for startup opportunities, particularly engineers, I'd say. I think that's the biggest one. And I think there's a lot of efforts that are kind of coming up now that'll help address that. I think all the schools in the area could do more, particularly Yale, to kind of grow their computer science departments and kind of think about the impact that they're having on the ecosystem, where their talent goes after it leaves the school. I don't think very few grads stay here. Very few are from here. I think that's kind of a two-sided problem. But yeah, stuff like the Halberton School, I think it's going to be, super helpful. Good program, good strategy. CI does so much to kind of build up the ecosystem, contribute to the ecosystem. CT Next, all these groups are kind of working in tandem to sort of build an ecosystem here, and I think it's just a multifaceted process. I think what Harvard's doing with InsurTech is working really well too. So that's I think there's a lot of different strategies, and some that are going to work. But I think the biggest challenge right now for us by far is talent, identifying it and just having access to it. It's really hard to relocate people to New Haven from elsewhere. Entry-level people seem to always eventually want to move somewhere else. And some of the kind of the older talent is kind of from a different generation of code bases, very well paid, very comfortable in their jobs in the area. So it's kind of like who's in that middle ground in the state right now, from an engineering perspective, is a little bit lacking.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of that. I think the ecosystem here is very tight and strong and growing, like you and others that are doing a lot. And I do think the difficulty of a startup in Connecticut is sometimes overstated. The scarcity of talent is counterweighted a little bit by the scarcity of competition for that talent. Like, again, in our little trip out to Silicon Valley, we were talking to some VCs, and they were talking about the pros and cons of. Both my kids are actually out there doing startup type stuff, and the competition. I mean, for one engineer, there's 4,000 companies trying to hire that one engineer. So, I think there's a lot of pluses, and those pluses are growing in Connecticut. So I'm optimistic this will continue to be a good place for startups.
Your kids are kind of part of the problem.
They are.
Oh, you got to get them
Bring them
back
back here. They're coming home for Christmas. I won't let them go back.
Have you seen any changes since you came here to launch Tango?
Yeah, I do. I definitely feel like there's more momentum in the startup world. I mean, it's not huge, but like the district, like again, what you're doing, CI is Connecticut Innovations is in my opinion, an incredible force of good in this state. What they do and what they fund. I mean, they've been tremendous investors for us, and and they've supported many companies around the area, many of whom I know, people there. And so I think there's just that positive momentum seems to be going. And I think the state's sort of going through its own dilemma about what it wants to be when it grows up in terms of, economy and, and all the debates that are going on are generally healthy. And I think are going to be even more pro-entrepreneurial, because I think they're going to see that as the engine of growth.
To open up for Q&A.
I wanted to find out, sorry, if you could talk more about the challenges you talked about. When you say you found the dynamics of sales team that you needed to scale those, the question was from you, because I've written it and asked it. Well, what caused the high traction and more income you made that you're talking about? And you say you found that the dynamics and sales team, you had to scale them. Could you talk a little bit about that?
About scaling the sales team?
Yes, and the dynamics you also talked about. Like
Yeah.
what exactly was it in addition to the sales?
Well, I think in healthcare in particular, it's very unique. Probably the biggest challenge kind of holding healthcare back is this ecosystem of disparate systems that don't connect with one another intentionally. And so fighting through that, I think, was our biggest challenge from the early days and until now. It still remains a big challenge. Is like how do we build the interfaces with the systems that we need to talk to be able to sell our product effectively. We can't really sell our product to someone when we can't interface with their software that they have today. And I think healthcare has been very intentionally designed by the players that have been in it for a long time to be locked down. And so I think overcoming that is what allowed us to kind of break through, find product market fit, and really sell our product. And I think the sales team, I think that was its own set of challenges. I mean, you're probably better positioned than I am to talk about what allowed, what the sales team looked like and what sort of allows it to be scalable and what it's going to look like going forward.
Yeah, I mean, so to answer your question about scaling the sales team, I mean, in my opinion, a lot of people underestimate how process-oriented sales needs to be. And, people say, well, we've just got and sell it. We have got a good widget. We'll just hire a salesperson. They'll go out and sell it. But it's as much science as any other part of business. And you really need all the way from, a CRM system, tracking conversion rates, the acquisition cost, the lifetime value of a customer, doing all the numbers, the pricing. We spent a lot of time on pricing. Overhauled it once and then overhauled it again, testing the pricing, and then the process from, okay, how do you first get a lead? What do you do with that lead? How do you convert that lead? How do you track it? How do you accelerate it? How do you get it under contract? And then once you get it, what do you do with the customer? How do you grow it? What's your customer success strategy? One of our sales stars is right here in the front row, and he, John Neitzel, John, raise your hand. He actually came in as earlier this year, and had, again, as I said, 14 people, one person can make a big impact. John's made a big impact. He started out at sales development and now is an account executive. But I think getting the right people and putting the right processes in place and thinking about sales in a very formal way, and there's obviously a lot of good books out there. The Challenger method I think is a good approach to use, but there's plenty of others.
Would you agree that pricing was probably the biggest thing that allowed us to scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of broke the dam, but I think another thing is commission plans. I mean, how are good salespeople are coin operated. You want them to be coin operated, and if they're not coin operated, you should look for new salespeople. But that's you've got to put a plan in place where they can see how they make money. You want to incent them, and you want to do good follow-up. But I think pricing certainly, but I think pricing alone wouldn't have solved the problem.
No. But I think that was the biggest component of what was.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, we knew what it was.
Yeah.
John has a coin slot on the back of his neck.
I'd like to take credit for the uptick in sales, but the pricing structure is pretty helpful.
Yeah.
It's a combination.
Inflection point. I had a question regarding mentoring. For connected innovations and any startup that is coming up. Normally, we come from backgrounds where we have a good job or something, whatever. So actually, to get into the startup business, you get a lot of negative feedback from your friends and family. And so, normally people have told me that you have to get a good mentor before you actually quit your job and get into the startups. So, what kind of resources are available and how can we access them? I mean, it's for all three of you. That can, make us believe that yes, it's going to be a success, or the risk is worth taking.
Well, I think I worked with CT Next from an early point. I mean, not a lot, but I think I think I just kind of built a little network around myself of people who were supportive and excited. But I don't think that there's any way to get around the challenges of going through the first 3 years. I think my wife pretty consistently wanted me to stop the whole time. She's okay with it now, but for the most part, for almost the whole time, she thought it was a bad idea, and it probably was a bad idea. It was a bad idea. But now it seems like any sane person would be like, oh, that's a good idea to do that. But I don't think, unless you get sincerely lucky, I don't think there's any way to get around the fact that it's going to be an uphill battle for a little while. I don't know. Nick probably knows more than I do about local resources that might be good. I don't know. There's some stuff with New Haven's running some of the programs you might know about.
Yeah, I think to some extent, reaching out to every resource is something that you need to do, but it's just the introduction, and really the most important thing is developing trust with somebody. And that's going to take time and investment, and showing somebody that even if it's not your startup, that you work hard and that you can be successful, and that it's worth them putting the time in for you, and that when they introduce you to a potential investor or think about connecting you to somebody that might be influential in the industry, that they know you're going to take it really seriously and not put sort of half your effort into it.
I do think an incubator, depending on the person, could be a really good thing. I think there's a lot of negative feedback around incubators right now, but I think it really is dependent on who the founder is and what they need. I think what incubators do a good job of is providing like a proof point to external people who might otherwise kind of dismiss you. But the incubator, if you can kind of convince them to take you, can give you like a network, and I think it can give you some validation that other people will read into. And I think for us, we joined this group called Startup Health. I didn't really have a product, didn't really have a team, didn't really have much of anything, we gave up a lot of equity early on. But it was certainly worth it. I think it helped me build a network, particularly in healthcare, that kind of let us get through those early stages and kind of build that network of support that we needed. And I'm sure a lot of the early angels wouldn't have talked to us if it weren't for that sort of proof point that they felt like validated it. Even though if I was an angel investor, I would probably say it's not the best thing to use as a proof point, but I think it just works.
Yeah, just one thing I would add, and it's probably a little bit later than what you're talking about, but I definitely think and you've probably heard this before, but the early investors you get on are really partners, and you want to make sure that they're aligned because they're going to go through some rough times with you, and generally, ideally, you'd find investors who can add value besides just money. And I would say that's true with professional services firms, like your accounting firm. Our law firm is here, Wigan and Dana. They've come just to listen, but they're a great local firm that has is a great partner and knows, and they're part of this whole ecosystem.
He's only billing half for this.
But I think that building that network of trusted advisors, professionals and investors, is very important.
Link to your point that Connecticut has a perception of not being a great place to start, do a startup. I did a startup. I've done many, but I've done one I did in California. My first investor was my law firm. I was at an event like this, met a guy there, said, I'm a DLA piper, like my idea, called me in for a meeting. The next day he says, we'll give you $20,000 in services. If you succeed, you pay. If you don't, we just write it off. Connecticut, you got to pay $20,000 up front for them to talk to you.
Yeah.
Then I went to my landlord, gave me space for equity in California. This was in Sunnyvale. And a few days later, I'm playing tennis in Mountain View. The guy on the other side says, you look like an entrepreneur. I said, startup. I said, what do you do? So I told him, he said, will you come for breakfast tomorrow? This is California. Next morning, he tells me, how much money do you want? I said, $100,000, a good start. 5 days later, I got the check.
Was this early 2000 by any chance?
No, 2013, actually, and 12, end of 12. Connecticut's a tough place to raise money. Very tough, because they'll put their money in hedge funds. Nobody will trust you with a startup. California, on the other hand, is the worst place to actually do the business. The worst place. You want to pay your taxes? First, you're paying 4 times the taxes that you pay in Connecticut. You can't get through to anybody, to pay your bill. You'll spend hours on the phone. Everything's a hassle. You go anywhere, there's no parking, there's traffic. Everything's literally a hassle. Housing is overpriced. So for the right model is to do your company here in Connecticut. Raise your money in California. And that's what I'm doing right now. I've got 4 startups, and I'm successfully raising capital there, but they're all based in Darien. Nobody in Darien's writing me a check. So I fly out to California every 2 months, spend 3 weeks there, and I come back with a couple of $100,000 every trip. That's the way to do it. I think that's the model. Sorry.
No, I think you're right. I mean, it's definitely been a struggle. I mean, there's not a lot of VC firms in the state in general, but there's also not a lot of startups in the state to fund. And if you're going to fund startups somewhere else, why would your VC be here? So I think it's a two-sided problem. It's not like the startup problem here is a lack of VCs. The lack of VCs is just as much related to the lack of the ecosystem. So I think it's I think CI would be the first ones to admit that they wish they didn't need to be here, but I think they feel compelled to be here because I think that they, in a sense, are essentially what jumpstarts the VC ecosystem in the state and kind of lets it support startups to the extent that it can, but I think there's no way around needing outside capital. And I think that's our capital has been and will continue to be coming from a portion from outside the state.
CI is going to give you money once you already have customers, you've got revenues, then they'll give you money.
Yeah, they do have a pre-seed fund, I think, still.
That's a lot of talk.
Yeah. The bar is certainly higher than it would be for an angel, particularly on the West Coast.
Yeah, if you want to raise money, go to the West Coast, do your startup here. There's less competition. You actually have engineers here that are hungry for work, and they're good guys. A lot of them work in New York City. I've had no problem hiring talent here, right here. I've got some of my best engineers right out in Darien. People who work in New York City, they'll work part-time on the weekends, get you an MVP ready. They'll even do it for equity. You want to raise capital? Head out west. That's the model, and it's working. At least for me, it's been working. And I think your comments is great. It's a matter of perception. And we need to change that perception.
Yeah,
because
no, there's a perception.
There's a heck of a lot more money here than there is in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. There was certainly a recognition, though, of the investors that there was a good reason not to be in San Francisco from a cost perspective. And they were pretty blunt about that. But I think at the same time, there's a higher risk of investing in a company that's in a place that's not somewhere where you're going to be able to go all the time. And I think that's another sort of issue.
We're so close to New York City, right there. So.
I was wondering from the perspective of a young potential entrepreneur who will begin my career saddled with student loans like many of my peers will, what advice do you have for getting comfortable with the risk that's involved in entrepreneurship? And let's start with that, yeah.
I think that's a hard question to answer. I had a lot of student loans. I have a lot of student loans. I don't think it's a good idea to start a company with a lot of student loans. It's not a good idea. But if you're dumb enough, you might do it anyway. I really don't think there's a better, I don't know what to tell you. I think you just have to want to do it a bit more than not. I think for me too, and I think most entrepreneurs have a hard time kind of like just getting a job and working in a big company and kind of going with the flow inside that big company. And I just kind of feel like you need to do what you feel like you need to do. And that just sort of forces you to do something really dumb, which is start a company with a wife and a kid and a student loan. It's not a good idea, though.
I used to work in health tech marketing. Now I work in intellectual property marketing. But I was just curious, who is the target audience for this product now? Are you marketing towards revenue cycle management firms or payers or electronic health records companies?
Yeah, so we sell to revenue cycle, we call them billers, third-party billers, who work with small practices mostly. And they're typically small businesses. Could be 2 employees, could be 150. But very much small businesses, very easy to get in touch with the owners. The hardest part is that we sell through integrations with software vendors that they use already. So we really have to have that relationship in place and that technical interface in place, which is one of the biggest challenges and takes well over a year to get to the point where you have a product, you're able to work with the vendor to interface with them. Oftentimes there's like a chicken and egg problem. You need a customer to get the vendor to pay attention to you. And if the vendor won't pay attention to you, you can't get a customer. So you kind of had to get through that. But ultimately, we're trying to target those third-party billers, but to kind of build a reputation in the ecosystem so that all of these players kind of are interested in working with us is pretty critical for us to sort of just, that's what it goes back to, like whether or not there was a shortcut. I kind of have a hard time thinking that there was. In healthcare, I think it's just particularly like, can you find product market fit? Maybe. And then can you find product market fit with the people that you have to integrate with? Because if you do something that they don't like, they're just going to kick you out the door and not let you do it. And so a lot of the healthcare system is pretty locked down with that regard, or very, very disparate. Like if you want to sell to Epic, sell to Yale, you're selling to Yale. Even though they have Epic, that Epic is different than someone else's. So that could kill a company right there. It's a 12-month sale. That's pretty unique. And probably isn't a sale so much as an unpaid pilot for a year. That kills company, that kills innovation, and the healthcare ecosystem is well set up to do that. And I don't know why they sit around wondering what's wrong. I think it seems pretty obvious.
So I'm in healthcare, provider billing, rev cycle. I was wondering, have you tried, you just give an example of Epic, have you tried maybe to partner with some of those big vendors? Because in my experience, some of the other companies, like a third party, something like you guys, partnered with some of them. I don't know if you tried that.
Yeah, well, that's who we do. We do partner with the ones that the billing companies use. typically the ones that are cloud-based. They're not names that most of us know, like Epic or McKesson or Cerner. But there's sort of, somewhat smaller companies that sort of work in that space, partner with them, kind of basically pitch to them that we're part of creating an ecosystem with them for the customers that they're trying to go after. And ultimately, that's what a lot of these vendors want to build, like a marketplace of applications that healthcare providers can purchase and use, but that marketplace has to consist of things that sort of fit within their priorities. And if you try and touch something that you're not supposed to touch, or need a data element that they're not wanting to give up, then you're kind of out of luck unless you can get enough customer weight behind you to sort of force them to do something different. So it's a difficult problem, I think.
We got time for one more question.
You mentioned you've got some hiring coming up in a market that's a little difficult to find the right folks. In that situation, how going forward, what are your plans, or how are you balancing skills and experience versus cultural fit?
So, I mean, I think we're, again, I think the priority would be intelligence, but culture fit is certainly if there's not a cultural fit, even if they're very bright, we wouldn't consider them. I mean, the early on hires we're being very careful about. It's expensive to make a mishire. But on the other hand, we are taking some chances on people and going out and trying to invest in people, because we realize it's sort of a unique situation. But I think the priority is bright people who are motivated with a startup and ideally have some related experience to what we're looking for. Does that answer your question?
No, that's great.
Thank you.
Thanks.